The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 22nd chapter. After Jesus begins teaching in the temple, religious leaders try to trap him with questions. First, they ask if God's people should pay taxes to an earthly tyrant like Caesar. And now the lesson. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated.
St. John's has been here for 50 years, and it's been a great blessing.
I have learned that God is amazing because He helps others and He loves everybody.
I think it's important to have a good relationship with God at my age because high school and middle school, people judge you on how you look. If you have God by your side, it will be a lot easier to have faith in yourself, that you are confident of who you are, and you know you are beautiful on the inside.
I think it's important to gather and worship as a community because I think there's a strength that rubs off from one person to another.
I love the music here, even in the traditional service and also the contemporary worship.
The outdoor worship, I love it so much. I just like how the energy is ecstatic and you're here with your community.
I see God with us in choir as we learn a song, as we get better at it, as it harmonizes. It's a harmony with God.
It's one thing to come to church and have the worship experience, and that's great. It's very important. But there isn't a person out there who isn't hurting in some way.
If you join a small group, it will just jumpstart your ability to be in a relationship with other people, and their faith comes off onto you and gives you strength.
We have just recently really broken through a large barrier for men, and we're starting to pray together. Now that's a big deal for these guys.
It's a powerful experience. I think St. John's has been blessed with more and more people just recently now becoming part of small groups. So we're learning all the time. But when you have a living room of people that are sharing ideas on a passage of Scripture, it's just synergistic. You're like, oh, I never thought of that.
Growing up here, I saw God in a lot of the adults here, showing how to not just believe in God, but how to live your faith. St. John's does have a passion for youth, and because of that, the youth are having a passion for God.
I really like how they have Sunday school. I get to connect with some of my friends that are the same age, and they believe too, because I go to a public school, and not everybody believes the same way I do.
And I think kids are dealing with a lot more now than they were even when I was in high school, just through some of the conversations. And I think it's important to have a faith-based group of their peers, but also other adults that aren't necessarily their parents working with them, because it's a safe place to talk about those issues.
I think we have a congregation that is very strong in reaching out.
And serving doesn't mean you have to go be a missionary, and serving doesn't mean you have to teach Sunday school, but every day, if we're open to the needs of other people in our community and the needs of our fellow congregation members, you will find ability and opportunity to serve every day.
one of the things that drew me to St. John's was their outreach to not only just our community, but the community around the world.
We have very powerful relationships with our sister congregations. We have one in Tanzania. We have one inner city Milwaukee at All Peoples, and then we have the one in El Salvador.
The fact that we have those connections with other Christians in so many places around the world is just fantastic to me.
At St. John's, the youth here like to help people. Whenever I ask what they want to do this year in youth group, it usually revolves around serving others.
On the mission trip the youth group took to Kentucky, I saw God in the homeowner, Lois, that we were working for. She was not only very grateful for what we were doing, but she also cooked us meals. She was just really nice and shared stories with us, and it was just a really great experience.
I would encourage people who are struggling to get outside of their comfort zone or struggling to say yes to just take the step. It's just a leap of faith.
I think here at St. John's, I don't feel like there's a lot of judgment at all. I feel like there is a lot of support and there are opportunities everywhere.
This church does an outstanding job of educating, of caring for its members, and my life would be nowhere near as abundant and as peaceful and as comfortable as it is if I did not have the people in this church and the faith and the support they bring to me.
And I want to help people understand who he is and what he does for this world, why we are even here, why the universe is here. God made this world. He said, let there be light, and he made it.
There's something inside of us that wants to say yes to these things and is nudging at us. And when you open that door, it will be a rich experience beyond belief.
God's work in our hands. I hope that video made you smile, because it made me smile. And honestly, it made me think back to my first worship service here. It was a Saturday night, and I was communing you all at the rail, and I remember thinking, I don't know any of these people's names. I don't know any of their stories. But it won't be long until their stories will be united with mine. And I will know your names and your stories. And now, 3 years later, I'm able to say, you know, I've begun that journey with you, and I know you. And just seeing those images brought me back to that first service and how far I've had a chance to get to know you. I hope that also brought back for you the images of this past year, of memories, of thoughts about how we do our ministry together. And how truly it is God's work placed in our hands. And so we are at this time of year when we are kind of still in the midst of great ministry for 2014, but we are also looking forward to what God has for us in 2015. And so I thought maybe we could take a look at how we support this ministry that has been placed into our hands, this work of God. And we're going to have a little fun. So I hope you're ready for a little fun this morning too, okay? And it's going to be at my expense. So be assured I'm not going to do anything to you. But we're going to have a little fun, but we're going to talk about how we support this ministry that we believe God has called us into. So first I'm going to run some numbers. And if you're a numbers person, you'll like this. If you're not a numbers person, you'll be bored. But I'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. So 289. That is the number of actual giving units that we have so far this year, of people who have supported with financial gifts the ministry, God's work placed in our hands, 289 giving units. And so far, through the first 3 quarters of this year, those 289 giving units have given over $532,000. So thank you. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your commitment to believing that this work of God in our hands is important and that you have made a commitment to that. That is huge. It's been a blessing to so many people. If you think about how that breaks down, that means 532,000 average, dividing that up by 289 giving units, that means for the first 3 quarters of this year, that means we average $1,841 per giving unit. And I know that sounds impersonal to call it a giving unit, but I want to say household or family, and sometimes that's a family of 7, and sometimes it's a family of 1 or 2. Okay, but on average, that means a giving unit is given $1,841 so far for the first 3 quarters of this year. And that if that pace continues, then we're looking at roughly $2,455 by year's end. That's a gift. Thank you very much. Now, our ministry for 2014, this year that we're in, back in January at our congregational meeting, we believe that God was calling us into work in ministry, and the price tag, so to speak, the ministry commitment that we needed to do the work of God placed in our hands for this current year was $826,000. So that's been our ministry budget plan for the year we're in. And maybe you already know that. If you don't, maybe that helps. That's a hefty amount, isn't it? But we have big work here, and a lot has been entrusted to us to share through God's work. So how do we support that kind of ministry? How do we get to that kind of a number? And how do we reflect our giving? Well, there's a couple of different ways, and I think there's probably a lot of different ways. But there's a professor by the name of Mark Allen Powell who's a dynamic professor, I think. I've heard him once and really enjoyed him. But he talks about the concept of fair share. So he admits that he says, I decide what I believe is my fair share for my congregation, and that's what I give. So I started to think, well, if we were talking fair share, and if fair share meant that every giving unit gave the same thing, what would that look like for an $826,000 budget? Well, if you divide that by our 289 giving units, that comes to $28.58 per year, per family, okay? Or $238 a month. Now, when I saw that number, I thought, oh, that's almost what I have to pay for my cell phone bill for 5 people in my family, and it really got me mad. And I got to do something about that, because that's way too high. But unfortunately, in some cases, that's the kind of number that we end up spending for something like that. I think my very first car payment back in 1984 was $218, so not far off from that. So you think about how what those numbers are in your own head, and you'll probably think about something that you have in your family commitments as well. So simply on the basis of fair share, if every giving unit was equal, it would be roughly $238 a month. Now, let me tell you, I don't agree with the fair share model, okay, for a couple reasons. Number one, it's not biblical. I don't think it's biblical, at least if you're going to make everybody the same. And secondly, it can't be equal because everybody doesn't have the same ability. Okay? So for some families, $238 a month would not be a hard thing at all. But for other families, $238 a month would mean that they couldn't supply adequate housing for their family. They couldn't put food on their table. And so we're not equal. All is not fair in that way. And so I don't think fair share is really a way to think about how we fund our ministry. But maybe it's a little bit informative, and maybe it gives you a sense of things. So what is biblical? What is a biblical model? Well, you probably know about the concept of a tithe. That comes out of the Old Testament. It is this this guideline for the Old Testament people that says you take 10% and you give back. You give back for the work of God. You give back for the care of your community. You give back to say thank you to God, to recognize that everything you have and everything you are comes from God. So that means basically you would live on 90 and you would offer 10. Now, I also remembered that why I put 80, 10, 10 underneath that is because some of you may remember, I think Thrivent in its prior, I think was Lutheran Brotherhood or AAL, and one of those two, I guess, used to have a bank. This was before I had kids. Maybe some of you used it. It was an 80, 10, 10 bank that you could get for your children. Do you have one of those? You're nodding like you might. You remember it. Okay. And that was kind of a way of helping kids to learn at an early age some financial management. And it was, their suggestion was live on 10, save 10, and then your gift of 10. So 80, 10, 10. That was the way that was structured in their banks. So the biblical model is a way to think about that. So what would that mean if that were how we would imagine our giving? Well, you might remember 2 years ago when we went through the TAG process, one of the things we had them do for us is to do a demographic study to learn about this community in which we serve. And we did this demographic study for a 5-mile radius around St. John's. And what we found out is that we don't have a growing area, but the age groups that are growing are the seniors and those under 10. The other thing we learned was that the average household income in our area is $84,000. $84,000. So if the average, if that's the average, then a tithe on that $84,000, obviously, you just move the decimal point and you get a tithe of $8,400 would be a tithe on an average giving in our area, income in our area. We also found out that $84,000, of course, not everybody makes $84,000, but there's a range. And so that in our area, the one end of that range is that families might make $50,000, and the high end of that range is that somebody might make $181,000. Some of us have never seen that kind of number before, okay? And that's okay. Everybody has something different, and it's not about equal. It's just about what is, okay? So if families at either end of the range would tithe, then that would mean a gift might be anywhere between $5,000 and, of course, $18,100. But let's think back. Remember what we said at the beginning. Right now, our giving as a congregation, on average, giving units divided up, 289 giving units based on kind of the pace we're on right now, is that the average gift would be $24.55 per year. And if that represented a tithe, that would mean the average family was making $24,550. Now, I would bet that for many of our families, that's quite low. That our income might be quite different than that number. But that's what that would mean if we were tithing. And so if $8,400 is the average tithe based on the average income in our area, but our actual is on pace at $24.55, that means we're giving at about 2.9% of our income. Now, so that's quite a bit of ways from a tithe, right? But you know what? We're average. That's about what the national average is. For charitable giving, for church giving, that's right in the ballpark, okay? Now, for a family that's making $50,000 and a tithe would be $5,000, the current gift would be about 4.9%, so about halfway to a tithe. And if you're at the upper end of 18,000, meaning 181,000, the current average gift here would be about 1.4%. So again, if you hate numbers, you're really wanting me to move on in the sermon right now. And for those of you who like numbers, maybe this was a little bit informative. Maybe it was some food for thought. But I guess what I want to say is finally, the how is not really the point. how we decide what our gift is going to be is not really the point. Because what is at stake is the why. It's that thanks be to God moment. We give because everything has truly been given to us. Everything does belong to God. You heard in the gospel reading today, Jesus in this dialogue, and people coming to him and saying, should we give taxes to Caesar? And Jesus asks for the coin, and he sees Caesar's face on it. He says, well, looks like Caesar's to me, so render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. But everything is God's, isn't it? That's our faith commitment. I mean, if you think about it, we come into this world, and I'm assuming you came into this world the way I did. I had nothing. Literally nothing. And some OB nurse put a blanket around me that the hospital purchased, and they put onto my head a cap that was knitted by a hospital volunteer. And I will go out of this world with one thing: the outfit that my family chooses to put on me. And everything in between is a gift, is God's. And we give to say thanks be to God for providing it all. For providing it all. And for allowing us to take part in God's work that is placed in our hands. But you know what I think the challenge for the church is nowadays? It is that we are left to invite people into support of God's work in the age of things like the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And I don't know about you. How many of you know what the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge is? Okay. How many of you took the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge? I know many of you did. I saw your videos on Facebook. Okay? And for those of you who don't know what it is, ALS is an absolutely horrible, fatal disease that robs people of quality of life and finally robs them of life. You may know it as Lou Gehrig's disease. And I don't know who came up with it within ALS, but it was a great challenge. And what they invited you to do was to take an ice bucket and dump it on your head, which is really cold and very shocking to your system. And I think the thing is, the point is you do it to yourself, and hopefully then you also give a gift to the ALS Foundation for its research to get rid of this disease. But what people did is before they put that bucket on their head, they would challenge a bunch of friends to do it. So it kind of grew exponentially, right? Because if I did it, then I challenged some people, and they did it, and they challenged some people. And ALS raised millions, I don't know what the final tally was, millions and millions and millions of dollars that they wouldn't otherwise have received because of that challenge. And I took it, my family took it, we gave a gift to ALS, and that's an important thing, and maybe some of you did too. But the problem is the church and the ongoing work of the church is left to kind of compete, if you will, with things like the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge that are incredibly fun, participatory, multisensory. They are contagious because we share that. They grow things exponentially, and we are left with much less exciting ways. But I thought, I will do the Ice Bucket Challenge if that's what it takes to get your attention. I can do it maybe once. Tim's bringing up the water, and in fact, Tim was good enough to say that he would take it too. So we've got 2 buckets. I'm going to take off my microphone. Yeah, just undoing my microphone here. Because I guess if that's what it takes nowadays to get people to think about ministry, I guess that's what we have to do. So here it goes. All right, so maybe I won't actually do it. And the only reason I won't do it is because Tim refused to clean up the water that would spill. So you have a little fun. But see, that's the kind of fun, engaging stuff that the world is coming up with. And I don't begrudge the world that. I'm glad, because ALS needs to be funded. And other things need to be funded. But the church, you know what, it's not about gimmicks in the church. It's not about trying to pull a fast one. It's really about us gathering, because we are in it for the day after day ongoing work of Jesus Christ, of caring for the poor, of standing with people in injustice, of setting the captives free, of proclaiming the Lord's favor, of announcing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we do that day in and day out, and that's what it's about, not about some gimmick. So I invite you to think about these things in this week to come. Next Sunday, we'll be commissioning our couriers, folks from our congregation, who will go out and they will bring some information to your home, and they're just going to drop it off, and they're going to come back at some point later that week. But I invite you to just think about whatever way you choose to decide within your family, to think about that it isn't about a gimmick, but it's about the ongoing work of God that has been placed into our hands, and that we share that generously, joyfully, and thankfully, because we have this wonderful work of God in our hands. Amen.